So, hello everybody to the last afternoon of the Point Coming Home conference. Well, there's the morning tomorrow also, but this is actually the last afternoon of the conference. Basically, we're gonna talk about another topic that has a lot to do with the pandemic. I think probably one of the topics that we are talking about at the conference that has had most to do with the pandemic. So we're going to talk about organizing events. And with me, we have quite a conference team here. So there's Nino from Georgia, DataFest Tbilisi, Forset. There's Maya from TechSoup, Irina from Opora, Ariana from Open Data, Kosovo, and, sorry? Yeah, and sorry about that, yeah. And then there's joining me online, Bybers from IFCN, organizers of the Global Fact, one of the probably dearest conferences to many people here at Point. So since Bybers is kind of like, the one the odd one out since he's joining us online, so I'm going to start with him. If we can have him on screen somewhere, please. I guess not. Oh, yeah, there he is. Hi, Bybers.
Hey, Darko, my friend, how are you?
Great, great. So, Bybers, do you remember how it is being at Point in person?
Yeah, it's been 7 years, and honestly, I'm so jealous of you guys right now. I mean, you seem to have like all the fun there. I'm only joining you with a cup of coffee from early morning here in the US. So really
Yeah,
jealous of you.
yeah, great. So, but basically, for the start, I want to kind of make you promise that next Point you'll be here in person with us.
Yeah,
Okay.
tell me where should I sign.
Great. So, Bybers, as you know, we're talking about we made this title, Future of Events, Are They Changed Forever? But, we want to basically more dig deep into the experiences that we all had in organizing events during the pandemic and the whole thing. And you have kind of a special event that you do, that is covering people from all over the world, from multiple time zones, and that's kind of bringing the global fact-checking community together each year. So, I'm going to start open, how did the pandemic influence global fact, and what do you make of it?
Well, I mean, it made a big impact on the conference overall, especially last year. It was, February and March when everyone in the world was kind of realizing that we are at the brink of a pandemic. And that's when actually we decided to cancel the in-person Global Fact and do a virtual one last year. And we only had 3 months actually between the decision of the cancellation and the virtual conference itself. So we kind of just did everything by from scratch. I mean, at that time there were not enough options out there as far as virtual conference platforms goes and others. So we kind of did everything on YouTube. There was a lot of need for offline communications and online communications with the participants, with the speakers. So last year it was like a hell. I mean, for from an organizer point of view. But this year we learned a lot. Obviously, we had more than a year to just see what worked well, what didn't work with the last conference, and we participated to a lot of conferences to see some of the best practices out there. So this year we decided to keep it small. Actually, 2020 we had a shorter work, much more concentrated global. Most important thing I think this year was everything was just at globalfact8.com. So it was simple to register, easy to log in, and everything like the networking lounges, the messaging platforms, the sessions, the workshops, everything you can name it were under one platform. So that's kind of like the best thing that we think we did this year's conference. But honestly, I hope this is gonna be the last virtual Global Fact, and soon we will be doing an in-person one next year.
And well, you actually gave segue into the next question. basically, like, do you think that online is something that's gonna continue, or what's the future of global fact and of events in general, and basically, like, how is going to how is next global fact going to look like? I mean, at least what you predict at the moment. Obviously, we cannot predict the pandemic and everything at any point, but, like, what do you want to happen?
So we have announced that the Global Fact 9 will take place in Oslo, Norway, between 22nd and 25th of June. So that's still the plan. And to be honest with you, on my second screen right now, I'm taking a look at the hotels proposals that we get from Oslo. So everything is on track as far as the in-person Global Fact for next year. But we definitely will have a strong virtual presence for the Global Fact 9, because even without travel restrictions or whatnot, there will be still challenges for people coming from like different parts of the world to a country like Norway, as both from like financial point of view or like the vaccination status. I mean, the world is getting vaccinated, but that's not fair. It's still in some countries they have still issues in accessing to the vaccines. So we just want to make sure the Global Fact 9 will be accessible and it will be fair. So we will make sure that everyone will be able to watch all the sessions, participate to all the sessions, even without being able to go to Norway. But the plan is to do a hybrid Global Fact with a strong offline and online presence at the same time.
That's great. I mean, thinking of it, and especially in terms of accessibility to conferences, like, how did you, I mean, on one side there's the accessibility of the, you know, people or areas or regions that are kind of less accessible in general. That's one part of the question. How did, or did the pandemic change that, in your opinion? And the second question is, how did you manage the accessibility to people from different time zones, and, like, having in mind that Global Fact was
Mhm.
actually a conference that covers, like, pretty much the whole globe?
So let me start from the second question. So everyone who were registered to Global Fact 8, they were able to watch the sessions either live while they were happening or anytime. So the sessions were immediately available after they came to an end. So anyone could easily just like log into the website and watch or replay the panel at their own convenience. So we were able to figure it out. Obviously, they were not able to join the chat, the conversation there, but they still were able to follow the conversation. But even with that feature, we still wanted to make sure that the conference hours, the panel hours, were kind of like suitable for anyone. We started at 9 a.m. Eastern time here in the US. So we were still able to have participants from the Philippines, even Hong Kong, with the time difference. I guess except Australia, we were able to cater to all different time zones at the same time. So that's what we were trying to do. But in addition to that, I guess the entire virtual conference, experience gave us the understanding that we actually don't need to travel all those places to just like tune into a 1 hour session or 1 hour conversation. Conferences are becoming more about human connections, networking, and more experience sharing rather than following a few people on the screen. What you do there right now with the Point Coming Home conference is more than just like a couple of people talking on the screen. It's more about experience sharing, and it's more about like bringing together the community over same common values. So we are going to pivot to more human to human interaction, more capacity building and experience sharing in person aspects of the Global Fact conferences, and then compensate the knowledge, the know how, the technical conversations to the virtual aspect of the conferences. So anyone can get what they need and have the experience in being together in a conference venue, in a different city, in a different country, but also being able to meet with others who are coming from more challenged countries.
Yeah, I mean, coming to what you made as a point, there's obviously more people networking somewhere than they are in the room at the moment. But good thing that's all recorded and going to be available immediately afterwards. So we've learned something from the pandemic. But believe me, there's a lot of networking going on at point, I kind of get to your point. And basically, one final question to you, what do you think, what would you point out as the main thing that will be a conferencing left over after the pandemic, something that will survive this shift back to, if it happens, back to the in-person conferences?
Good question. I think it's gonna be making sure that we have all our slides ready in advance and then we share them with our producers. Because nobody likes to have a speaker to present a slide deck without any heads up. So there's gonna be probably more value to the production aspect of the conferences from now on. The technical knowledge, the technical know-how that we have as a community is way higher than what we had in 2019. We always took proud in global tech conferences being, fancy, being, kind of engaging with the audiences. And to be honest with you, we learned a lot from the point conferences. The point conferences to me had a lot to do with our approach to global tech conferences. But with the virtual conference, I think it's more going to be about making sure you meet you bridge together the supply and the demand. A lot of people have a lot of things to share, and a lot of people around the world have the need to know about those work, or whether they are findings, research, cool stuff, whatever we name them. The more that we can kind of bring them together and empower people to build new ideas, innovate, and come up with new innovative ideas on those findings or on those connections will be or should be the center of our conferences in the future. I'm not interested in bringing 350 people to a conference room one more time just to let them watch 4 or 5 people speaking. It should be more about networking, as you guys are just doing right now in Sarajevo, and also encouraging and empowering them to work together. Because the collaboration still benefits a lot from human to human interaction. And the more we can facilitate that during our conferences with the accumulated knowledge on delivering the information out there, I think we can talk about, conferences 2.0 going forward.
Thank you, Babers. It's been great having you at least like this time next year. We see you in person here.
Yeah, I promise that.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So, back to the room here. We've done our online part of the hybrid conference. So, let me start out with asking pretty much everybody here, are you kind of fed up with online conferences? Raise your hands who is fed up with online conferences. Okay. A lot. You are also? No, kind of. Okay, so how many of you have attended an online event in the last month? Okay, still a lot. I didn't actually. It's just a resolution I have. I'm not doing it anymore. So, my question is coming to the panel, and I'll start off probably from the middle of everything, but we'll cover the whole spectrum. So, in your opinion, comparing, last year and the first few months of the pandemic and now, what are the main differences that you see in terms of the audiences, the attendance, the people, the whatever, on the events that you do? Are there any differences and what they are? Whoever wants. I mean, we can go in order or I don't start, okay? Yeah, you can start.
Okay. Yeah, that works. the differences a year ago and now, it's mostly, I think, everyone being online, with the main difference being that while a year ago, and we were talking about this, there was no choice. Like, there was no other way. Everybody, if you wanted to do it, you had to do it online. Well, now, given like even point here, and more parts of the world where it happened even earlier, I'm thinking of Central Asia specifically, where we were working this year, more and more people were meeting face to face. So the sort of realities distorted, meaning like for some people it's completely normal, so you're competing, your online event is competing with their face-to-face training in, you know, even another country, not even staying in your own place. So in that sense, it's almost it's not that it's not a competition, but you're definitely at a disadvantage in that sense. Obviously, if the content is valuable enough, then you have, you know, targeted audience, it's important to them, then they will for sure show up. But I mean, from a personal point of view, if I were to choose, you know, coming to Point live or watching it online, like there's no, it's clear what's better. So in that sense, it's becoming more difficult as people are moving different countries are moving on different paces. So in that sense, it's very different. What's also different is that everybody got better at using technology and doing it online, which is, I think, great for both organizers and participants, because we all know what it's like to be a part of a not well done online event. So that's not great. I think in general people got better at cutting their material, which is a big part of it, because online is not as understanding of, you know, slip-ups or just like ramblings or elements of the event that are not completely necessary. So I think that got better. I think from the organizational point of view, yeah, we all got better at doing it online, which was also like, you know, learning process on speed, because you had to do it in like, you know, in our case, we moved online trainings, face-to-face online trainings in 3 months, like trainings that were supposed to happen 3 days live. We moved it into with the help of the partners, we moved it in the completely full operation in 14 countries in 3 months. So in that sense, it's a learning value that would not otherwise have happened. And obviously I also think we got better at understanding what it is that we actually need from an event. I hope, I guess, like from my perspective, but I think both participants and organizers got it, that you learn to make better choices, meaning like you choose things that are necessary to you and valuable to your work, and others that are maybe not as much, because with online, you have that option. And then the last thing is different, that I think is the crucial thing, that and quite banal, but important, that we actually learn to appreciate like the face-to-face element of it, like the human connection part of it. That obviously it's not like we didn't know that it's cool to meet other people and talk and, you know, have fun together while on a conference or while at a training, but for me, I knew this, but still I didn't know it. Meaning, like, only once it was taken away that I understood how much of our activist NGO work, and specifically, is built. Like, what big part of it is the human connection that builds trust and, you know, allows for other amazing things to happen.
Great. Who wants to do it after? Let's keep it on the couch for now. Okay, Nino, go. Sorry. Give it to Nino, come on, it's fine. Everybody has a lot to say, I guess.
I think Maya's answer was quite comprehensive. I can just add from an organizer's perspective what has changed. When we organized our first event in May 2020, I was super excited because it was something new. That was the first time when one day before the event, I told my team member, hey, this is Zoom. like, hey Zoom, this is Lali. Hey Lali, this is Zoom. You have to lead a workshop or like a session using this tool. There will be a speaker, like you need to press these buttons like very quickly, like 5 minutes. Like she almost like said, I'm like, just fire me. But then like she got used to it, and like we had like lots of fun organizing that first online event because we took it as a challenge. It was like really fun, and also that was the time when we thought that we actually provided some content to the people who were locked up at homes. And back then, having Zoom calls were not that like ordinary for others. So like we actually like brought some opportunity for them to connect to each other, and it was amazing. And I felt like very fulfilled, and the entire team was very happy. However, fast forward a few more months, by the end of the year, even though we did not have any offline events still happening, it was like people had this like Zoom fatigue, they were tired. We were also tired of organizing these online events, and it was like very like different dynamics, let's say so. Now we are organizing our first hybrid event in December, and I'm still like kind of like excited. First of all, because I imagine that I will get to meet some people like face to face, like here at Point. And like when I was choosing some photos for this panel, I almost like started crying when I remembered all those like crazy times, after parties, drinking that we had at offline events. It was like very emotional, and like having this back is very positive and very exciting for me. However, because of the regulations and because this virus is still here, we still need to keep in mind the security. And for the events like maybe like Point, where there is usually like less than 200 people, it's kind of easy to get back to offline. But for the big festivals, like from 500 people to 1,000, we cannot go back to fully offline anytime soon. So now it's a challenge for us to make sure that we provide this like safe environment for offline participants, but also we manage to engage online participants as much as the offline ones, or like closer to that. So it's still a challenge. I don't know how we will manage that. Like I can come back next year and tell you what we did, but from an organizer's perspective, it's another challenge for me doing this hybrid event, and I feel like motivated. But if we are talking about like what will happen after like a few years, I don't know, like during this pandemics, what happened from our side was that we introduced a new event, DataFest Online, this like first event that we organized, and we said we want to keep doing it even after the pandemics are gone. So we believe that online events still has certain value for certain type of people, because it's becoming like it's more accessible, it's like, I don't know, easier to organize and all those things, and we want to keep doing that. But it's a challenge for us to make sure that it is still attractive, it's still engaging for the online audience. So we will, like my takeaway would be like we need to keep trying, we need to keep experimenting, and then find that recipe and share with each other, because I think we all need to like do our own homework and then come back and share with each other like what we found.
Just a quick follow-up to that, like the DataFest Online format, like is it different than the usual DataFest, like, and how and why and how, like just.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first one was kind of taking DataFest Tbilisi just online, that format, and we had like Zoom meetings with parallel sessions, but also Slack interaction. So we would manage to have this networking and like get to know each other part as well. I think this is also very important to keep in mind during organizing hybrid events. How do we let people who join online not only watch, but engage into the events? And that's a tricky part. Not only like give them the tools so that they can engage, but how to motivate them to engage. And here, like, we have been doing like some crazy things, like posting some photos, GIFs, and like encouraging them to like do the same, having some competitions. So first year it worked very well, but like second year it was a struggle again, because of that, like, it was not new anymore. Like, people have been like moved to Zoom, moved to Slack, and it was a new toy for them anymore. So that's why I think like I'm stressing the importance of experimenting and introducing something new with like every new online event that we organize.
Great, thank you. Irap.
Yeah, I would like also to follow up on what Nina said, because I think that it would very much depend on the format and also on the expectations of the audience, you know, because in case if the expectations are about all networking, all this crazy stuff, you know, then online format that doesn't suit that much for sure, you know. But if you want, you know, when it's only about transmitting the information, when it's only about transferring the knowledge from an expert or from the speaker to the audience, then online can exist, you know. For instance, I think in every country there are those boring scientific conferences with a lot of scientists who are just talking and talking. Come on, let's go online. You know, you don't need to spend budget, just go online and you won't. So the effectiveness is going to be the same. But if we speak about some added value of those formats, if we want really to seek some effectiveness, to provide more physical touch, more contacts, more networking. You know, in this case, the online format wouldn't work. I also have the example that's not about the conference, but we are like working as a domestic observation mission. So we have to train observers. And it's not only about, about saying them what to do at the polling station, but it's also about feeling the person, whether they're brave enough in case of some conflict situations at the electoral commissions and the polling stations. This is also about building up trust between us and those audience. This is also about reporting. This is so many things that you have to build up, and it's very it's extremely difficult to do it when it's just some blah 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 person talking about really very boring things, even for me. And in this case, online just have no right for existence, unfortunately.
So there are, I mean, just to kind of take something away from what you already said, everybody, is that there are things that can be done exclusively online and that are just fine online, like, some trainings or some knowledge sharing, but in general, there are things that, don't just fit online that well. Okay. I heard that you had innovative approaches to online events.
Yeah. Is it working? Yeah. Yeah, we do, but I'm first thinking what else different I can say that they haven't mentioned. Thanks for that. But no, absolutely. I first of all agree that the pandemic, especially to us who are in charge of organizing events, or whatever activity that needs to bring people together and implement the plan behind it, it has prepared us perfectly on how to adapt to things which are not initially planned. So that's a great plus to what we can say what happened a year ago and how this is going during this year. From my experience as part of Open Data Kosovo, first of all, I'm very glad to be here on behalf of ODK. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Well...
And enduring the visa process and travels and everything.
No, don't get me started on that.
I'm not, but just need to say it.
Yeah. It's good that it's the second day. We could get some rest. So, to give you first an idea about, I'm just going to take a concrete example of our annual event that we do, which we take great pride on it. Well, me first, perhaps to you that are not much familiar to our work, Open Data Kosovo is a promoter of open data practices. It believes that these practices, open data, will increase in transparency, will also help on public institutions to increase their openness, be more transparent, increase their accountability. You guys know all about that. So, but we do all of this by using technology. So we develop digital solutions to help all of them open their data sets, or maybe just assisting on how they do their work, by also enabling the civil society citizens to be as much engaged and to use tools such as apps or platforms to also know what an institution, how their work is going, or like e-services. So behind our, after everything that we plan to conduct through various projects in the sphere of open data, we have now this tradition for many years, from 2018, that we do this annual event, which is in the format of a conference, international conference, where we invite all of our partners that we work with them during the entire year, or like partners from a public institution, national, regional, or international. And we talk mainly, is this intertwined conference where we tackle themes of government, open data, and technology. And that's how we come up with namely the GOT Data International Conference. This is the event that I'm talking about, the conference. And last year in 2020, as for all of us, we had to go online with it. Because if we can go through the pictures, just scroll a bit below. Maybe through the website, the GOT Data website. Maybe you can, I just want you guys to see
It's
like
there,
the
it's
actual.
there. On the other screen. Other screen.
Okay, cool. Yes, thank you. Yeah, you can see pictures from the previous events, the ones that were held, thank you guys, the ones that were held in person. And then the 2020 event that we did online also was successful, to say, because bringing up all the points that my friends here just mentioned, of course, it was, people were more available to attend. They didn't have to take on flights to get to Pristina. And then they were also, everyone was just, because we do this by the end of the year, sort of, and they were very familiar with doing things online. And for us at ODK, the pandemic didn't really challenge us much in regard of technicalities, because embracing technology is kind of part of our work, and we were like, yes, this is our chance. We can just don't change much. We just can go and do our work, but do it online, working from home. I'm pretty sure for most of our colleagues wasn't that much of a challenge, but it came to the point that this year, we just realized, okay, we actually, that point of appreciating doing things in person, oh yeah, we do miss going back to the office and do some work there, you know? So now we're at that point, we're waiting eventually to make it go back in person by next month. We're planning the agenda and everything, the details behind the conference, and we already have sent invitations to some of our partners. And guess what? Their reply to the emails were like, thank you so much for the invitation. Can I do it online, please? We're sure it's going to be a hybrid mode, but we expected that. We see people are comfortable now. And also the option is open. If you wanna, for those that are excited to just come by and be there in person, you can also do it online. So I do appreciate that out of the pandemic, which has let us more space to not spend more time on things such as traveling, I don't know, logistics really, but also save a bit of budget and of our own time and do things online. So I think that's the good of technology. But in regard of other challenges, I mean, sure, there come challenges with these, but mainly what I can say is when it comes to not having to stop your work, even though it's the pandemic and you have to do things, even if you're restricted to not go out in the streets, you have a lockdown, you can't go to the spaces of your office, okay, you can do that from the comfort of your own house, your own bed, you know. So it's great. You can still do work, even though the situation out there is pretty, you know, not that good with the restrictions in place.
Yeah, I mean, for us it was like kind of either we're gonna do point in person or we're not gonna do it at all. You know, that was kind of our decision this year. And like, you know, I'll just share briefly because you kind of when you talked about the can I do it online part, it kind of triggered me. We this year and many of you know that because like, you know, you were contacted pretty late about everything here. We kind of made the decision to do it end of September. So like, you know, we had a month and a half to do the whole thing. And if it was 2019, I would say no way. Like, you know, because people at that time would like, have their lives, agendas, conference attendances and everything planned months in advance. So like, I would say I'm not going to curate the program for a conference that needs to take place in 45 days. No way. But like, I really virtually got almost a 0 no's for the program this year. Like, and obviously there was a couple of people like, that, and as you can see, mostly people across the ocean, that were kind of, okay. Actually, some of them didn't even realize that we were inviting them to a in-person event, because like only after we agreed, for instance, with Angie from PolitiFact, only like weeks after we like, agreed on her speaking, and I kind of mentioned her like, so are you coming or what was the, and she was like, oh, I didn't realize that there was a possibility of in person at all. So like, she ended up being online. But, so, please keep doing online events so we can do point properly and we don't have to bother with attendance. But no, I'm joking there. But like, actually, really, I don't know if I contacted anybody that said like, I have another thing planned, so on these dates or whatever. There were some people that had like plans for the weekend, so they had to travel today, but they still wanted to come even for a day and a half, and then like, travel back to their families to spend the weekend with them, even though it was like, just a short trip. They said, okay, we're just gonna do it because like, there's not so many opportunities at the moment. So, my feeling is that people are kind of really feeling that they wanna be part of these events, and I think it's not just, work-wise. I think it's also a personal feeling of the people, because and my opinion on these changes throughout the pandemic. I mean, beginning of this year, it was still not there were not offline events available, but still people didn't participate in online events because they had other options of offline socializing. I mean, in-person socializing. While last year, like summer of 2020, there were no options of offline anything. So that's why they participated in events. So that's at least my take on that.
No, so sorry, just super briefly, only because I agree with everything.
Please.
It's just echoing the crowd. But I think it's even more so about not just the format, meaning decision whether to make something online or offline. It's that, like exactly what we talked about, the goals that you're trying to achieve. So for example, for our event, like Megaphone that I'm responsible for, that always was small. It was always like 100 people like this. But the two key goals of Megaphone were always like to make people feel comfortable to share, to understand that there are others struggling with similar challenges, because it's for activists from Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And then the second goal was that we worked with Anna on the practical aspect of it, so that it's workshops, it's actual things that you do, and after 2 hours you learn something new. So I guess two most difficult things to transfer, I would say, online. Because I actually do believe that without this sense of community, it's that much difficult to even learn. Like, obviously, it's like a tech demo, it's fine, you can learn tools and stuff, but it's always like it sits better when you remember it better because you've learned it in a context of, a nice event. But again, having said that, we also talked with Nino about this, that I think we're also missing the point that it is a sort of like a bubble conversation, because for a lot of organizations, reality of going to international events is non-existent. Like, there's a small layer and group of organizations that actually attend these things. And I used to work for a Polish organization that we went all around Poland to like the smallest cities, but it wasn't an option to like come to Sarajevo. So I think there also the realities are different. So obviously, but given that we're functioning in this one, the community building aspect is what is sort of most important in what we're doing, apart from the sort of educational trainings and stuff.
You see how we are getting back to the pre-pandemic discourse, like, 100-person small events, like, a year ago that would be blasphemy, saying that a 100-person event is a small event. Okay, I mean, just things are getting a little bit back. So if anybody has anything to say or a question, just please raise your hand, and at any point we just we're just gonna continue. There's a hand there. We don't have anybody with the, so I'll do it.
Hi all. Thank you for the presentations. I have a question for Ariana from Open Data Kosovo. Since Open Data is also gathering data, information regarding procedures and processes, have you kind of researched for productivity of a conference online and that conference in person to people, how it affects and how much information they can gather from online and from in-person conferences? So,
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the question. That's such a great question. Now, we haven't done a research regarding the productivity of events. We haven't compared them yet. Why? Because we are just back online. So now we have the basis of how it went during the online events. And now since we're going back to it, thank you for the idea, we can also just do the comparison and see how much or less productive it has been. So I think we'll bear that in mind and see about the results and how effective actually. And then we can, from there, maybe it might answer the second part of what's the topic of the panel, are they changed the future of these events? Are they changed forever? Do we want to go then online forever? Do we want to go offline? So it's about to see that. But thank you.
I can actually answer a bit to that. I have a long history with events of different sorts, and in the beginning of the pandemic, in June 2020, I was working with one university that was supposed to have an offline conference, but they switched to online, obviously. And I was preparing that with two ladies who were like over 50, and they were very used to academic environment. And we worked on showcasing some projects of participants of their long-term project and having some of the discussion about the fundings within the project. So I helped them in mastering Zoom and making sure that those ladies who were never working with software, basically, they will feel comfortable. And I was really happy that they really felt comfortable thanks to me. Like, we had the training as like, listen, I promise you, if anything goes like bad, you will be able to master it and you'll feel comfortable. And like everything was online, so I was helping from outside. And then I was working with speakers, I was working with the program, knowing exactly what Maya said, that you need to really know what you want from people and what you are aiming for. I prepared people for that. And after, when we had an evaluation with the organizers of the conference, they said, well, I thought online will be worse than offline, but it was better. And I was like, yeah, because somebody actually put effort in organizing it. It wasn't just a template that you always do it. It was this effort that was put, the intention, the thinking about what is the goal, who is there, like how to make them comfortable. So I would say that the productivity doesn't really lie in the, if it's online, offline, hybrid. It's like, know what you want to do and be realistic. So also set the expectations in the right way. And what Ira said is actually perfect. With if I want to get to know people, how they interact with each other and so on, well, then online might be very, very tricky. But making an academic conference better Online is fantastic. You can totally rock their world, basically.
If I can, I just
of course.
follow up on that, because I think that at the very beginning there were some attempts just to copy paste the offline format and to put it online. Like, okay, if we have a conference for the whole day, like 6 hours, then we will go online and do the same. And thanks God, at some point...
Or 9 hours, as point is.
At some point, yeah, the civil society understood that, come on, it won't work like that. Yeah, and it's really about understanding what do you want, knowing the target audience of your event, and also applying proper tools, online tools, to reach the goal.
And I'll follow up on that, and it's going to be a question. So, and it's a general one, so it's not basically directed towards this group here. I'm kind of having a little bit of a feeling that I'll draw a parallel to activism and civil society in general. I think that, this going online has allowed this conformity to kick in, and kind of just checking the box of what we do through likes and people doing it. Has it done similar in some way for the events? Just kind of checking the box, okay, we can bring 50 people online who are virtually there, maybe not even paying attention, but we can check the numbers and just kind of continue our work to some extent. And I'm afraid that we might get to that point where we're just ticking off events because we just promised to somebody that we're gonna do them, rather than actually making something out of it. And we say, okay, we have attendance, but nothing is being done. So that's my take on a good part of these events. And what do you think about that?
I actually think that, again, repeating myself and Anna, that it's actually about understanding what your goals are. Because if you were to ask me this a year ago, I would have said online is the worst thing ever, but we had to do it. I actually don't think that anymore, because I do feel there have been examples that you can build even a sense of, small community, or a connection, if that's the goal. But then there's 10 steps you have to, 10 ways you have to design that event. So it has to be small, it has to be repetitive, so people come back day in and day out, or throughout a couple of weeks. It has to have engaging activities. It cannot be just listening and stuff. So there's a whole bunch of things we learned. So in that sense, I wouldn't organize, if an event was organized just to be organized, then I think that people just deserve to not have participants, or to just people have ticket off and log in and then log out in a second. Because you have to put a certain amount of, both to offline and online even more, I think, a thought and actually time to design it well, so that it aligns and that's actually useful and people get anything out of it. And this is actually a good sort of, indicator of whether you did a good job, if people are just coming or not coming in that sense. Obviously they're tired, but then if you still want to do an online thing, then you have to do something to get them there. So you have to put that much more effort into it. And like I said, I really do feel like people are more picky in a good way, that you just don't attend things that you don't need or you think are badly organized. And in that sense, I don't, there is danger of that, but as an organizer, this is your job, to not make it so that people just come and go.
I totally agree. It's harder. I mean, that was exactly my point. For point, it's easy. We just bring people. We know that they're expecting good time. They're expecting other people to network. They're expecting to bring home new projects, new ideas, new cooperations, and all of that we cannot offer on an online event. And that's why we know that people like coming here outside of the program itself. There's more that they bring back home with themselves, and everybody knows that with an online event you have to just try more to offer them something else, and that's tough. There's one.
Thank you. Thank you guys for the presentation. Actually, what I wanted to say or comment, it's a lot similar to what Darko just said. I was just wondering, this can be a question for anyone in the panel. Maybe at what level do you value the importance of basically mingling in conferences, in traditional organized conferences pre-pandemic, in the sense of that we all know, and maybe some of you guys agree, that almost a certain amount, maybe not the same, but some amount of discussion and networking, very important networking, happens in the corners maybe of a offline conference, just as much as it is done in official discussions. And how do you see that being translated in an online format? Do you feel like people are comfortable just as much mingling, networking, thinking of projects that maybe are linked directly or not directly to the theme of the conference, as much as it happens offline? Because of course, if we have 100 different people with different missions, they sort of get together and actually think of new projects and get something back home, even if they don't do it in an official format like this. How do you see that happening, or do you see that happening in an online format, or how could we sort of manage to put that in?
Yeah, I can start, and I think the answer will be kind of similar what I answered about, like, how was the shift in organizing online events from the organizer's perspective. The same was from the participants' perspective. I think the first event that we organized, the very first online event that our participants attended, they put everything in that. And we really saw that they got that networking part, they met each other, they started working on new projects and so on, because the design of the event was also like that, they had to work on a project together in newly established teams. And it was really cool and great, because back then, they were hungry for new connections. Imagine you have been locked up at home for 3 months. You have not even been having these Zoom calls with your team members, and they were hungry for these new connections, and they managed to do that. So this makes me think that connecting to new people online is possible. And come on, we have grown up on forums and chats, and we have met our friends, and some of us even partners online, right? This is possible to get real connection in online settings. But then the question, it got difficult when all this online, we got the overload of online events, and this Zoom fatigue, and also work was online, talking with friends and family was online, and then it became very hard. So I would really go back to what Anna said. It does not matter online or offline or hybrid, it's just the format. It's about just how you design, what you think of, and what is the purpose of your event. I totally agree that the point is different. It's not only look, this is a new project that I'm working on, just learn from it. If it was the only this kind of thing, you can do that online showcase, right? But point is different. You meet people, you open up, you become vulnerable. So there are type of events that you can do online. There are kind of events that you should do only offline, and there are events that can be done in hybrid, and we just need to figure out which ones are which. And just copy pasting, I think is not an option anymore.
I have a short answer to this, and I'll give you the voice. I personally believe that networking spaces on these big conference platforms, and I've used a lot of them, meaning I've tested a lot of them and I've participated in a lot of them, are a different circle of hell. I honestly, just there, even if you organize them super well, you mark them, you prepare people to take part in them, you ask engaging questions, it's just awkward. It's just so awkward, and it won't ever be not awkward. At least, I mean, this is my personal view. So while designing events for tech, I just don't use it because I myself would not want to be put through it. Maybe somebody can do it. I would love to hear other experiences if somebody has done it successfully. In large groups of people who don't know each other, it's just no. I don't do it. But again, like I said, online, smaller groups, intimate, more sort of personal connections, energizers even, sure, like games, whatever, but only in smaller, more intimate environments, never at using a conference, however good the conference platform is, just hell.
Somebody else has a...
Yeah, I would totally agree that networking is just don't work online, but I should also point out, and I'm sending compliments to Darko and Point, because I think that, you know, the organizer, they should have a lot of courage to, and really to be frank to yourself and say, okay, we're not doing this year because online it's not the format we would like to see our conference in. So it really takes a lot of bravery, courage, and really, you know, understanding your mission, not even the goal or the aim of the conference, but something bigger, like the mission of why you are doing this, what influence you have on your audience, what do you want to have the impact over, you know, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So let's think a bit also bigger. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Well, about the networking, I wanted to relate to a question which was made by the audience, perhaps even like other research groups can like conduct the research on that and see the productivity. But what I wanted to just say like another word to relate if we, relating to our work experience, we took advantage of the pandemic to just tick a box on activities which have been initially planned. In our regard, I can say to reference back our annual event, it actually inspired us regarding the content, the quality, not the quality perhaps, but the content of the event, like the sessions planned. The actual main theme of the pandemic event in 2020 of Got Data was openness during shutdowns. So we sort of wanted to have that reflection or just like intertwine the pandemic on our flow of activities which have been planned before. So I guess what I want to say is that we took advantage of the pandemic to enrich our content and to make it perhaps a more attractive topic, or just like build on top of what has been planned previously.
That's exactly what I was like, you know, also referring to, and why we did. I mean, we did something. We didn't do the Point conference. We did a series of online events and like, you know, some other stuff. But it wasn't even a transformation. It was another thing, like, you know, because we realized that actually doing this online, you know, doesn't work. Like, you know, it just wouldn't work at all. And coming to, and I'm going to abuse my position to ask you, since you are already sitting on the panel, even though you're not on the panel, but like, you know, coming to your session. How can you connect, like, you know, offline, in-person conferencing with, like, you know, well-being and mental health of the people? Like, you know, I'm thinking that that also factors in when deciding on doing these. I mean, for me, not this one because I'm organizing it, so it's definitely not a retreat for me. But you know, I kind of see it as a retreat for people where they kind of get a chance to kind of lay back, discuss, talk, and not think about everyday work for I mean, think but not do the everyday work for a couple of days. So like, you know, just.
So actually, I think that, so outside of Zoom fatigue and just taking that into account, that people will be tired, but people are missing connections. Like every time I was doing something online, and actually this is Kamil that he taught me, people need to talk. Give them more time that you would normally give them, let them have a warm-up, open them up, and then they will take advantage of any space you give them to talk. This is the need that we lost. And it worked every single time with whoever I was working. It might cut on knowledge, but it always was on rebuilding this human connection. So this definitely is an issue, and I really don't like to think about this productivity because it feels like useless. It feels like, yeah, they will talk of whatever, like, where's the project sharing? Where is like some kind of a professional exchange? While the professional exchange will be possible only after people will talk about, hey, like, I don't know, do you like green or prefer pink? whatever, like this kind of silly stuff. So this is one. And one more thing that I am really thinking that is an issue in terms of well-being and cultural differences. So it's easier to bridge cultural differences in openness, extrovert, introvert, and trust when it comes to meeting people on offline. Like, I don't care, like, if you're American, I can see, like, okay, you might not be communicating how I am used to, but you seem like a cool person. While online, and especially when somebody from other culture is facilitating, it requires so much thought how to approach people from a different culture. Like, I was so annoyed so many times with this, something that I could see is inauthentic, that I'm just, hey, how are you? That's all, like nobody cares how I am. While it's on the level of facilitator, moderator, MC, whoever, you really need to care about the people that are coming. Otherwise, they will not get the well-being. So here, like this is what I learned from Point offline, but I tried to translate it to online. You need to like your people. The people that you invite, you're happy that they're there, you're interested, like you're curious how they've been. And this is the real connection. I think this is the basic for well-being. So like meeting you at the airport, I felt like, oh my God, I'm coming home. But when we met for the first time, like we called about Point, I also felt like, okay, like my people are calling.
Great.
So we're not going to talk about fails? We're not going
No. Yeah, actually, that's my next question, is actually fails. And I just want to add one thing before going to the fails, is that actually even on online events, you know what's the best part of online events for me? These couple of minutes before the event actually starts, when we meet up and talk about, like, just gossip. That's like the best, for me, that's the best part of online events. Yeah, my next question is like, glitches, technology-wise, failures, what was there? I mean, I'll just kind of to break the ice, like, last week we had a training that we had online for a bunch of Bulgarian journalists, and like, the trainers were online, our facilitators, organizers, we were there online, and there was no participants at the agreed time, and we were like, what is happening? There's nobody. And like, this is very useful for them. They need it. There's like, a business opportunity. There's everything is there. So like, why aren't they online? It's a 1 hour time difference. So like, we were just we didn't realize that we needed to wait for another hour to meet them. So like, and this wouldn't happen offline, obviously, we would be at the same place. So, if you have any failures to talk about, please.
I don't have any like really good ones. So I would love to hear, like, because everybody participated in online things. So I'm sure you have some good stories. I even had cause there's one photo that I brought that obviously was taken without my consent, but now I'm using it. So maybe if you'll find it, yes, exactly that. Where I look as if somebody killed members of my closest circle, like that I'm scared for my life. But it was actually the beginning of Megaphone. It was the first hour, like 3-hour event, but we planned it like engagingly. So it's going really well. There's like a professional camera guy, another person that's taking care of the sound, 2 others in like a studio somewhere in some other place. There's the first speaker who's this wonderful psychotherapist, and she's like getting into her groove and speaking. And then we're doing this all in our office, and then 1 hour mark hits and everything dies. Like we lose everything. There's no stream, no nothing. And I'm thinking, okay, this is fine. People are used to it. Like we're gonna go back like that. And then it turns out that for some reason, during the pandemic, somebody in our office installed like a 1 hour limit on internet. So, and that person wasn't there at the time. So we literally had no internet and there was like calls. We don't know what to do. There's like 100 people online. Hopefully, after that, probably not as many. But you're sitting there, it's 4 people here, 100 watching, everybody like at their computers, and there's nothing you can do. Like you can ask somebody like, please, how do you turn back on the, yes, this is it. Um, this is the speaker, so she was actually in good mood, so that was good. But yeah, so that was one. But on the other hand, there was also like a 20-minute failure for a woman's activist from Central Asia, where we, despite having tested the translation button, just could not make it work, and like just for 20 minutes kept apologizing. But then it went really well. But the last one I'll mention, and I think, for example, Natasha, who's here, can attest to this. Technical failures can also be a factor for group consolidation, because the group unites against the tool that they hate. Which I won't name it, but it was like a video conferencing tool that we used for trainings. And people hated it so much that it became a running joke. Like, oh, let's do this on X. And like the number
You
of...
almost said it now.
No.
You almost said it.
I won't say it. It's like... But yeah.
Okay.
Well, almost a fail for us was that if you remember, there was a few hour-long Gmail services shut out, like in the spring, and we were starting the conference next day, and we had all the participants' information through Google Forms, and we were like supposed to email them so they had like they did not have the Slack link yet, they did not have Zoom link yet, and like we do not have any information of participants at all, but just like a few hours before the conference was supposed to start, everything was restored. Funny thing is that during these online events, we started implementing what can go wrong sessions, meaning that a few days before the event, the whole team sits down and we think of I don't know, utopian ideas, what can go wrong and how to address those things. And actually, one of our team members said, what if Google is down? Okay, we wrote down what if the Google is down, and we said, okay, let's download everything and have it on the machines, but we did not do it. So it was another almost a fail. But yeah, other than that, I cannot remember anything a camera not working or having microphone on. This is things that, yeah, has happened to everyone, so not a big deal.
Any stories there?
Yeah, I had a very charismatic case with kids. I've instructed them that I'm going to have a training session from 2 to 3. So they were waiting for me with the clock. And you can imagine me, so I'm finalizing the training, we have a final quiz, but it's 3 o'clock. And my kids running into the room, almost naked, just in pants, saying, Mom, it's 3 o'clock already, just stand up. And all the people, all the participants at that time, so they were eyes like that. But I wouldn't say it was a failure, because I think that at the same time, they realized that I'm a real person. And my kids in pants are also very real. And at some point, there was some connections. But I was happy that, I was really lucky that my colleague turned over all these quiz stuff. So it was very smooth.
So you can kind of familiarize with one of the films that we made for the conference, definitely. You never failed. You were the tech crew.
I mean, I don't know. I don't have any funny ones, at least. If maybe my colleague would have, we're from the same organization. I mean, in Kosovo, despite power cuts and internet going down, we're kind of used to it. When it happens, we're like, okay, cool. We just wait and then get back to it.
Then you go on.
Yeah.
I remembered one that happened to us. The second session or the third session of Point Talks, because we wanted to switch because we didn't have Point. And the session with Arab Spring, we had many of the participants were from the MENA region. And then suddenly one could not attend because the internet was down. The second lost electricity. The third one lost the internet, and we had 2 people in the end discussing the topic. So it was hilarious. But it was it was actually one of the best panel sessions we had. It was so productive, but you can never...
But it kind of shows that even when you think that online is more accessible across the world, it turns out not to be even so yeah.
That's it.
Are there any questions left over? I think we covered pretty much most of what was there. I just want to end up with one quick question to all of you, the same one that I asked to Bybers, and let's finish with that. What's the one thing that you think will be left over after we go back to whatever the pre-pandemic events were, that was exclusive so far to the pandemic? Is there anything that you think will survive the pandemic in the end?
No, I mean, apart from the good move to make things more accessible in a sense that even if they're happening offline, to make them available online as well.
So there's more ways to making things available online.
To give people options to take part on their own terms. And I hope that will be the case. Like, again, like better understanding what your audiences need and what you want to deliver to them. And what format fits best for that. I hope that's something that that stays with us.
Somebody else?
Yeah, I would say that like this flexibility is very important. The same goes for also like work, like being able to work from office and being able to choose work from like remote is a kind of like luxurious discovery that pandemic brought to us. And I think something similar should stay regarding the events as well. Some events should be like exclusively offline. Some I think can be online, depending on the like aim and audience, and some of them should be hybrid. Like personally, for example, like this morning, I attended Point online, and it was, I just like really wanted to like experience what it feels like when I have met people like in person. I'm gonna meet them again in person, but some of the sessions, just like for the change of environment or some other reasons, I am joining online. And it felt like really nice. It felt like, I don't know, like something possible. And in some other cases, I might have like just missed some sessions. Now I still like grab the content, but was not physically in the space. I think this freedom of choice and flexibility is something that we should work hard to maintain, to be more inclusive and yeah, just like to be more inclusive.
Let's just not end up with like, you know, the panel being here and everybody in their rooms in the hotel watching it, like, you know, but I agree totally. Any more ideas?
Yeah, I think any case when there is only a need of one-side communication, so when you present something, it might be like press conferences, briefings, presentations, whatever. It still may live online only. I don't feel, you know, like going to the press conference now. No, or some briefings or presentations if I can do it from my office. So I will reach the audience. Like the journalists, yeah, they can call me later. So there is no need for this. This is only the case when you need really this network, and you should feel the people. You know, when you should also reflect to their expectations of some networking and doing things together.
So there are type of events that we don't have to insist to be offline. Okay, good takeaway. You have anything?
I agree with her saying that freedom of choice, whether how best it suits you, where do you do the work, but also simplifying work, I think is very important to me personally. So, you know that thing, I know it sounds cliche, but like a meeting could be an email, you know, like, I don't know, an email could have been a text or something. Yeah, let's simplify it as much as we can so we just don't stress too much over it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I agree to all the points. The only thing is that I still believe that Point can be only done like this, as we are doing
and we
it
agree.
now. Like, you know, I mean, it cannot be changed by sending around like rounds of alcohol to other people in other countries. So, like, you know, we're just gonna try keeping it as offline as possible, and at the same time as safe as possible, which I hope we managed to do. In these days, we picked like a bigger venue. We kind of tried to make it as safe as possible, and you know. Thank you for the session. I think it's been a great session, and let's welcome the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for staying with us still here. My name is Anita Sokol, and I will be the moderator of the last panel of this conference. So we will speak about how the pandemic influenced journalism. But before starting the discussion, I would like to show you one very short video.
Moje ime je Dino Jankić, a vi gledate Studio Washington, program Glasa Amerike. Ovo su riječi kojima inače počinjemo emisiju na Glasu Amerike iz zgrade u Washingtonu. Međutim, u proteklih 14 dana sam proveo u samoizolaciji, tako da sam svoj stan morao prilagoditi studijskim uslovima i odatle radim. Od ove sedmice naša cijela redakcija producira emisiju od kuća, tako da zapravo smo svi pretvorili stanove u neku vrstu malih studija, oprema je tu i slično. U mom slučaju, iskoristio sam dasku za peglanje kao neku vrstu radnog stola i tu se nalazi razna oprema, nekoliko kablova, nekoliko bubica, u zavisnosti od toga šta mi treba već za javljanje u datom trenutku. Čak ovdje sam i snimio nekoliko najava za naše emisije i javljanje našim partnerima u njihove programe. Sad evo kako to izgleda iz moje perspektive. Moja supruga je inače producent, kamerman, režiser i sva druga pomoć koju imam. Laptop, svjetlo u zavisnosti od potrebe, mikrofoni, kamera i tako dalje. Veliki pozdrav iz Washingtona.
Okay, great. We just saw one video clip that was part of the campaign that we started, that we had last year, Media Center Sarajevo. So in March and April 2020, when the pandemic started, everything was canceled. So concerts were canceled, events were canceled, institutions locked their doors, schools locked their doors, etc. Even court proceedings were postponed. However, one thing wasn't canceled, one profession that is very important for democratic societies, and that is journalism. So journalists had to go out of their homes, had to take statements, had to follow the situation within hospitals, had to ask difficult questions, so they continued to work. And somehow the pandemic showed the importance of professional journalism. According to the digital news report of Reuters, for 2020, people they recorded that there is a rise in the number of people who watch television. Somehow, their conclusion was that there is a comeback of traditional media and of professional media. The report for 2021 showed that there is a rise in the level of media trust. So somehow, again, the pandemic showed the importance of professional news reporting. So last year in March and April, we asked from Media Center Sarajevo, we asked journalists from Bosnia and Herzegovina and from the region to send us their photos, their videos, showing that they're still working. So actually this small campaign on social networks was aimed at showing how journalists work, from where they work, and the importance of their profession. So this is exactly the topic that we are going to discuss today. So how the pandemic has impacted journalism, but not only the daily work of journalists, but also the media consumption habits. So whether we saw that there is that the level of trust in traditional media rose, and what is the future? So how will this evolve? So it is my great pleasure to introduce and to welcome our panelists today. So Gordana Bjeletic from Serbia, she's the editor-in-chief of Južne Vesti, welcome. Then Doruntina Baliu, a journalist from Kosovo, she works now for Radio Free Europe. And Maciek Piasecki from Okopress from Poland. So thank you for coming and for being with us today. So my first question would be how, so we just saw this video, we saw how journalists are working, and yes, in the background you can see also other photos that the journalists sent to us. So this was during the first months of the pandemic. How the pandemic impact your work, and whether, maybe Gordon, we can start with you, whether you had any issues in accessing information, because for example in Bosnia and Herzegovina a very big issue was to access information, so the pandemic was used as another reason not to give information to the public. So what was the situation in Serbia?
Well, in our case, that was the Q issue. I'm not sure how much I should explain about the situation in Serbia. Like, it's a developed democracy, government responsible to its citizens, not repressing professional media, not fighting against professional media, freedom of speech, freedom of press. If it was the case, we would be really surprised when the COVID started and all official sources were just closed. But the truth is that, that political climate and that situation, they really trained us to do our job in those like difficult and impossible really circumstances, to do your job professionally, to get the right information. But when the COVID started, it's obvious, like anywhere else, that the need of public to know, to get the real information that could really save their life really rised. But I'm coming from a local media. Južna Vest is covering a region from about 2.5 million people in Serbia. And there was no institution giving any information to people in South Serbia. But the situation with pandemic was the worst in that region, many people dying, and it was really hard for us to work in that situation, not to spread the panic to a public which is already in panic. People were scared for their lives, they couldn't get the medical attention that they really needed, and the government which was really saying it's all okay, it's a good situation in that region. The problem is like not that big. First they denied that we have COVID at all, then they accepted it and say it's only a problem for Belgrade. And so we had a strange situation that never really happened before. We as a local media had a correspondent from Belgrade because the government of Serbia was the only institution giving information, and we had to find someone in Belgrade to inform the citizens in Niš. And that was really absurd information. It was every day in the afternoon. They had a press conferences addressing to the public, and those members of the headquarters answered to questions from journalists. And then you have someone coming from Južna Vesti, from Niš, asking them what is the situation in Niš, and they really didn't know. Maybe some of those doctors or members of government wanted to give the answer, but they had no idea. And we are, as I said, a local portal. We get hundreds of messages of our readers a day. People ask questions, so we ask the questions for them. And what happened is that it really let us build even more that relationship between us and our readers. They begin to see us as someone not getting the information all the time, but as the only source, as the only media that is trying really to ask what they want answers for. And we have also absurd situation. Although we are a local media covering only south of Serbia, we got questions from all over Serbia. And we were source for those people too. So they were like asking us, can your correspondent ask that, please? We have no media in our town, and that town is, for example, somewhere in Vojvodina. And that really shows us how local media is important. And how that changed us, the situation, you know, when the pandemic started, many colleagues from different organizations started calling me and saying, now when we have time, we can finish that program, we can do this and we can do that. And I realized that there really are people that don't have anything to work at that moment. But for us, then the chaos started and it never stopped. We're still in that, how to say, vanredna situacija, how to say it in English? Yeah, emergency situation. It's, that crisis situation is not really over yet for us. It was a 24-hour job to inform the public, to give, that was the biggest challenge, not to give false information, really. And we had one false information, and only in that came from our government. You know, the official sources were the sources giving false information. And we needed to find a way not to let them do it again.
Thank you. I really like the points that you made, especially about your relations with the public, and also you mentioned how difficult it was also to trust official sources. So this was one of the major issues during the pandemic. Dorentina, maybe we can continue with you. So so official sources and sources in general during the pandemic were a problem, but also reaching those out for sources and taking statements from people who were involved. I mean, from people from the institutions, asking them to give you statements, asking them for interviews. So there was a really, journalists had issues with interlocutors. So what was the situation in your case, and had you any problems with contacting and reaching out interlocutors and interviewees?
Thank you. First of all, before I answer your specific question, I would like to say and thank actually the Point Conference of thinking of this specific panel, because I think it's, we were just discussing with our colleagues beforehand that journalists are not really used to speaking about themselves a lot. We sort of tend to try to convey information more and not be the subject of information. We don't really get the time to maybe complain or talk about our work or how the pandemic affected us, because it has been, as my colleague said, it has been a 24-hour job, even before the pandemic, but the pandemic just doubled it. What I could say from my perspective from back home in Kosovo, for me personally, and I think this changes a lot with different media and different journalists, but for me, it wasn't like the amount of work didn't go down, not in the least. It was double the work. We still had to go out. We still had to do everything that we did before. One of the things that I have noticed, unfortunately, is that even in such a thing as a global pandemic, political division doesn't get better. People don't usually just get together because they're facing the same threat. It actually becomes a weapon in a political war. For example, right at the beginning of the first cases of COVID in Kosovo, we had a change of government. The public was very antagonized. The public didn't quite even had the first important information about how to protect their health and how to lead their normal lives. And then political opposition and the government would just counteract each other, even on pandemic issues. Like, let's say there's a rule that came out to wear masks or not to wear masks, and then the other government would just counteract that decision just for the sake of the political war, not because they thought it was the best thing for the public at the time. And this, of course, translates to be very confusing for journalists as well. I remember with our colleagues, we were discussing right around January when COVID hadn't started touching Europe, or actually it was just in China mostly, and people were just discussing on what would happen if the virus spreads and how we would organize our work. And I remember that the concept that we had before the pandemic actually hit was so different from what we had to do. First of all, I remember that one of the positive things that we did is that we increased our online interviews with health experts that haven't been in the light for a long time. I know that as journalists we could have done more even before to actually get specific experts to talk about specific health issues, which are a very important topic, not very sellable in the journalism world, but a very important topic to be tackled by experts and not just people who feel like they want to go and talk on TV. So that was one of the first very important thing that we did. But as I was saying regarding the antagonism and the political war, I remember that very soon after the first COVID cases, COVID was starting to be used as an excuse for politicians, for institutions not to interact with journalists. I remember that I often say this, that trying to think about the pandemic in this past 2 years is like talking about 10 years time events squished into 2 years, because every month it was something new. Every month we had different information, and every month we had to deal with some sort of specific issue of the pandemic. So I remember that every month, like a very specific institution, let's say a commission of the parliament, would decide to be like, no, we're not allowing cameras in, we're not allowing journalists in. We have this media agency, you can buy the news from them, which was not possible for many of the media. So they were like, no, we need our journalists there, we need our reporter there. And this was not happening on a national scale. This was happening in specific institutions to the likes of a politician, whoever would decide to just shun out some journalists that they didn't like at the time. So this was being used as an excuse a lot, and it made our work a lot harder. Not to mention that in Kosovo, minority, the parallel institutions, there was this big confusion even about the numbers of the COVID cases inside the country, because the parallel institutions would not share the specific numbers that they had for, let's say, 4 municipalities to the whole country. So I remember Albanian journalists and Serb journalists in Kosovo were trying to interact with each other to actually get the big picture from what they had locally and what we had for the general public, to just get the numbers in a very, very tiny country in Europe. And we should have been able to actually get the full picture from our institutions. But as I said, even a global pandemic does not bring people together sometimes, unfortunately. So that was one of the struggles for us as journalists, and I think many of my colleagues could agree.
Yes, thank you for sharing this experience. Also, journalists in Bosnia and Herzegovina struggled with the same issue. Actually, in 2020, there were local elections, so many politicians and political candidates refused to go on television to give statements. And what happened actually is that they suddenly discovered social networks. So we also did a small research, yes, that they started actually using social networks, Facebook, for their own election campaign. So exactly this is some of the issues that journalists faced back then, and I think still are facing. So what about Poland? So a question for you. So you cover civil disobedience and you use your mobile phone, right?
I mostly cover things that are happening on the streets where people get out, even either in mass gatherings or like small acts of civil disobedience, as you said. And at one point when the pandemic hit, it all just became, still nothing was happening. During the first few months, the Polish society took the pandemic very seriously, and it was enforced very strongly, but there was also this strong sense of people being afraid for them, for their families, for the general society maybe. That's not the case anymore, because we've got a growing anti-vax movement, which is being right now, the current government is trying to appease them somehow. But during the first few months of the pandemic, nothing was happening, so we had to invent new journalistic formats that were never present in our medium, like maybe people trying to get more involved with our audience, like explaining what they wrote to the audience, like from the short films that they shot in their own apartments, which was, that would be maybe deemed unprofessional even a few months back, but like became the actual norm. And at one point, the government, it started meddling with the abortion laws, and then it was the election, which like some people were thinking is becoming fraudulent because of what the public television was doing, because of the first attempt to make the elections done by mail, which would be quite risky in terms of the democratic process. And finally, during fall last year, in October, there was like another actual attempt to meddle with the abortion rights. Like this time, it was like successful on the side of the government, which led actually hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. Those were the biggest protests in Poland that we had since the fall of communism and the early transformation, when the massive strikes were happening at the dismantled industries. And the government was doing like everything it could, like during the elections, during these protests, to curb them down. There was a limit on public gatherings that went as low as 5 people, and that was unconstitutional. That was being challenged in courts successfully. But even though that everybody knew that it will be challenged, the police was enforcing that nonetheless. We've seen brutality never seen before in Poland. We've seen actions directed towards journalists, as we'll be able to see in the short film that we've got prepared. And it was scary at some points, I would say.
Yes, we followed the situation in Poland, and it's it was very bad. But my question would be, what about was there a growth of citizen journalism then, and what about devices? So whether you started using some other devices, applications, because we saw, for example, on television, suddenly we have such a huge number of Zoom interviews, etc., and it became normal. Before it was, as you said, perhaps unprofessional to see something similar, but now, like, we are witnessing huge numbers of Zoom interviews. And how does it impact the quality of news and the quality of media content?
And everybody has like a library in their home. Yeah, all those people's in front of the books, but it wasn't my case. I was always on those Zooms when the people from TV stations called me from some statement in front of the wall, because I need to be sure that my children won't be going behind me, because they used to do that. When we have Zoom meetings, we had a situation with our colleague. We were having some meeting, and she didn't see that, but we all saw her daughter bringing down everything from the kitchen while the meeting was on. Your first question really was how that COVID situation changed us, and it really, in a professional way. As I said, we were prepared for crisis, but this is a different one. It really strikes people, and people's lives were what's important. But we had one, I can say, challenge, because we discussed a lot, should we be activists, journalists, and things like that. But in this situation in Serbia, we needed to become activists, because we needed to fight for the right of the people to know, to be informed, especially in this situation. So we have to do different things to be creative. We organized our colleagues from different news offices, from different media. And you know that in Serbia, people from professional media, there's not many of us, and people from tabloids. We call them tabloids, but actually there are mainstream media, all national TV stations and things like that doing propaganda, but even they were prepared to cooperate. So we wrote letters to our government. We planned how to go to clinical center in Niš all together to make them give any information to the public. So in a way, we really became activists.
There was some kind of solidarity, right, among
Yes.
media outlets, which is rarely seen, actually. I think you mentioned about fact-checking sources. So we saw also during the pandemic of the importance of fact-checking, and then we know that in media outlets rarely do we have fact-checkers, actually, because of the financial situation, and usually media directors would say this is just an additional burden for us to pay someone to fact check. But did it change during the pandemic? Because we witnessed also the infodemic, and that there were so many sources, information, and it was really difficult to know to whom to trust. So whether it impacted your work, whether perhaps you started maybe fact checking more or not?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say, and this is, I think what is often really forgotten when it comes to journalism and journalists is that it's, I don't know if you remember, but when COVID first started appearing everywhere in the world, one of the usual statements that we would hear, for example, from the World Health Organization, I don't know if you remember this, they would all say, this is a new thing, we never have dealt with this is a new virus, we're still learning from it. Even now, if we go back and check the statements of the World Health Organization, we will see things that contradict with what they're saying today. And that's not because of them being unprofessional, but it comes back to what they said in the beginning, that this is a new virus, this is a new thing that we're dealing with, this is a global pandemic. And I don't know that there's someone in this room or there's some journalists that can say that they have reported from a global pandemic before. And I think when it comes to journalists, people are much less likely to cut some slack to the journalists for reporting from a very, very, very new situation in the world. That being said, I think that a huge, huge burden and responsibility was put towards journalists to actually keep the professionalism and fact-checking and try not to, in a way, maybe even accidentally become spreaders of misinformation. And that becomes very, very, very difficult when even the experts, health experts, are not really sure how to handle this new virus, new thing. It's not new now, but it used to be very new in March of 2020. So it was this huge fear spread around, and this huge fear, I know, in the desks, information desks, of what we publish and what we not publish, and what is the consensus of who we quote on stuff. I remember this being a discussion at my information desk, and we said, listen, sometimes we have, of course, we have the World Health Organization, we have this huge organizations that are known to deal with this stuff, and this should be our main source. Some countries also have local health organizations who would sometimes contradict what the WHO would say. So this was a huge challenge, I think, first of all, for the journalists, but it was also a challenge because the rise of misinformation in social media was enormous, and it was very, very, very hard to compete with that, because as we know, bad news spreads fast. So if the misinformation and the fake, I won't even call it news, but the fake information and the risks of the vaccine spread around maybe once in 1 month during this pandemic, but we are still now trying to counteract that information, even with experts, even with people who have devoted their life to studying the vaccine, immunologists who would know better than them about the vaccine. So fake news spreads fast, and it's really, really hard to counteract. So I think fact-checking had become essential at that point, but also being very, very careful, even in maybe sometimes directly in the line of balance of freedom of speech and what we decide to provide to the public, because there's always two sides of a discussion, but when it comes to public health, that is very risky on what we decide to give a platform to, like anti-vaxxers, people who spread fear around the virus and everything like that. Especially, I think in 2020 was the pivotal year for that, because in 2021 much more things became clear regarding the virus and the pandemic in general. But in 2020 it was just sometimes a gamble on what media, even with a good intention, would do because of the situation. And I always say that if we want to evaluate the work of the journalists in the world regarding the pandemic, we're going to have to wait a few years, because I think this is going to be seen more clearly after this whole crazy situation hopefully fades out.
Yeah, March 2020 seems so far away right now. I would like also to invite the public, if you have any comments, any questions. Perhaps a question for you would be, how do you see, or did you see the role of journalists during the pandemic? Or still, I mean, we are still in a not very good situation currently. Anyone? Please.
Hi, Aldo from Albania. While you were presenting, I was actually thinking about something and I wanted to share it and have a question. Also in Albania, like your countries, basically one of the best sources that we had, speaking of course in the early pandemic time, one of the best source of information that we had, it was Prime Minister's Facebook. Like not the Ministry of Health, not press releases, like real documented what's happening, what are we deploying, what are we doing, etc., etc. And this, of course, as I can see, was happening all over the Balkans, but not just in the Balkans, even more than the Balkans, with the idea that the government wanted to, especially prime ministers, they wanted to maintain this information and, you know, while maintaining information, maintaining also the source of power that I will be the one to judge. Do you think this also affected, not just this, but this might have also affected the second phase of the pandemic, where it was very hard for people to, and it was easy for deflamators to actually spread out this information, and then for the government to, you know, to take back on the sanity of the discussion, being the fact that they were the one which, you know, they would maintain they want to maintain the information and will just release the information that they wanted. And one of the purposes is because they felt strong in the early pandemic. They felt that everybody was scared, so while everybody is scared, it's very easy for, you know, politicians to go out and say, you know, I behold information, so I'm the savior of the thing. And my question / belief is that the fact that they used this in the very early pandemic, this also might have caused, but this is also a question for you, like it's a thought question.
What I can say is that at some point the Polish government redirected the public attention and public hate towards their own incompetence, towards LGBT people, and that's because the hate mongering towards gays and lesbians has become the mainstay of the presidential campaign. So because was always a topic that made the discussion like really hot in our very divided Polish society, so they would just like shift it towards something that they knew would work.
And this is something a bit specific about Poland. That's one of the way. But what I'm trying to say is that one of the things that we're facing today is that with the reason why we have so much disinformation about vaccination and everything else connected to the pandemic is because we don't have a trust reference, which in a serious case like this, you know, regardless of what political party is in power, this is a serious matter. So Ministry of Health and Prime Minister's office, at least on this issue, should be a reference point, a trust reference point. But one of the problems and why we are not, like why we are having so much disinformation is because this is not happening. People are not agreeing to have that as a trust reference. And even if some governments, they would like to do that, at least in Albania, when it comes to vaccination, but also in Kosovo, as far as I know, in Macedonia as well, Serbia as well, when it comes to vaccination, there is a certain amount of sincerity from the government, you know, for people to actually get vaccinated. But it's kind of too late. It looks to me like it's too late now. They already abused that fear of people, and this was my question oriented.
Yes, what you said, it's exactly our experience, because what we could see is at the beginning you have everyone trusted someone, you know. You have, for example, one expert, one doctor who is sitting there in that crisis headquarters, and you trust that person. But as the time passed and COVID spread, what they did by manipulating with information, not giving the right information, giving false information, not informing the public correctly, and having the election in that COVID year, and you see that it's all about campaign and politics and giving measures that people couldn't really understand. It brought to the situation that people trust no one anymore, and that's the worst situation you can have in a society. People don't trust to institutions anymore. Not even, you know, you had some people that believing some experts. Now, people don't recognize experts. Who is expert? Because we have Dr. Nestorovic, you saw him yesterday. He's a doctor. He's, of course, an expert for something, but he's spreading conspiracy theories now. And you have a situation that you cannot really explain at the moment. We need to have some historical distance to try to understand what happened here. But what happened in Serbia is really confusing situation, and it was all about politics. You saw, for example, when we had elections last summer, that people were forbidden to be in a group more of 5 people, for example. From the other side, you had the meetings of the governing party when there were, I don't know how many people, so they didn't want to, they wanted the voices of people, so they let them have football games with full stadium. And doctors were like crying, come on, what are you doing? The hospitals are full again. We have a virus because of your election and because of you, that was really not responsible. But nothing happened. You can see, and it's really disappointing for us as human beings, that they are prepared and they're ready to do anything just to get the election. And that lack of responsibility is what scares us really the most. People just couldn't understand what's going on, and then they stopped trusting anyone now.
Thank you. We can go back to that part on trust later. I would just like to now go to the other part of our discussion, and that is the financial security and physical security of journalists, and how the pandemic impacted actually the financial stability of the media. Because in order to have professional media, we really need to find stable, sustainable financial models for media outlets in the region and in Europe in general. So how did the pandemic impacted the financial situation in your countries? We know that, for example, especially during the first months of the pandemic, advertisers stopped completely, or in some cases 80% to advertise their products in the media. The media outlets had to lay off their staff, etc. So how was the situation in your country? Maybe who wants to answer? Dorentina?
Yeah, I think the financial security of media and journalists is like the million-dollar question to be answered pre and post pandemic. I think it was always an issue. Of course, the pandemic made it worse, just as for any other workers. I remember that especially commercial media, the ones that were reliant on advertisement, really had it rough for the first couple of months back in Kosovo. And I know that there were layoffs, there were cuts in wages. the work went up, as we mentioned before. But as I said, journalists are really the type of workers that are used to, are not the best sort of people to take care of workers' rights, let's just say, or are really self-care, and they really put their work first, is what I'm trying to say. What was very interesting and maybe a bit dangerous afterwards, after the financial insecurity of media, is the government trying to step in. It's just because that whenever governments, I think, try to even help quote unquote media financially and try to step in and treat them as just like any other business, I think there's a very short line of that becoming problematic, and media becoming reliant on government funds and then not being media anymore, not being independent media. So I think there was a little bit of threat of that in Kosovo, because many large medias really were having to do cutoffs and layoffs because they didn't have funds to pay their journalists. But I think the positive thing was that there was a lot of resistance from media getting like uncontrolled government funds and stuff like that, just so they can stay in the clear of not being a government-funded media. And there was some solidarity from the public and different funders who actually stepped in and tried to help media. And I think overall, it wasn't like the biggest challenge on the media scene. The safety, on the other hand, was the safety of journalists and their health, first of all. So that's a whole other topic. But I think financially, yeah, it was very rough for first couple of months when the pandemic started back in Kosovo. And then it stabilized eventually, because even advertisers found the way of what was convenient for them in ways of advertising and things turning online and all of that. So it was better after a while, but the safety of journalists got worse after each month.
Thank you. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, journalists were asking for some kind of help from the governments. I know that some EU countries introduced some measures to help financially the media sector. For example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it was not the case. However, as you mentioned, on one hand, there was more work, and also now we are facing more numbers of threats, and also mostly verbal and online threats against journalists. So, for example, this year there is for the country there are bigger the level and the numbers are higher. So, what about a country in Serbia and Poland? We saw that this situation in 2020 in Serbia was not good for journalists, and now, and especially in 2020 when there were protests, and also later. So how difficult is to cope with that? And what about, we also mentioned here about the well-being. So journalists, first we saw that they had to go out and report, so they had to go into hospitals, especially in the first months of the pandemic. It was something new and something that everyone saw that this is very dangerous. So, and it impacted journalists' health, and there was more work. But on the other hand, we see that their security, the security of journalists journalists are not protected, so especially in the countries of the region. So how would you comment on that, and how it felt to work, and how it still feels to work in this situation?
Well, I cannot talk about financing. I'm a journalist. I'm only good at spending money in order to produce good news. I know nothing about how we survive. People from our management say that we are struggling, but we still kept our salaries and all the people. But what's the most important, we kept all the people from the COVID, because we got one more security issues from all the others we had before. There's attacks, threats and things like that, keeping people safe from the virus, but still doing that job was another really big issue for us. What's going on at the moment, you know, how I see it, because we are that's really not a good thing, but we are kind of used to threats. So me personally, I don't recognize them even if they're for me. But me as an editor, I see threats everywhere. You know, sometimes how to say that, I'm boring to my journalists. I keep saying them, be safe, or we have our eternal procedures because no one goes alone on some happenings when you know that something might happen or those people are trying to avoid professional media. One of the biggest challenges was reporting from the protest you mentioned, because I've never seen I reported, I don't know how many protests in many different countries, but these were the strangest one, because that wasn't one homogenic group of people, but people from so different ideologies. And everybody targeted someone, but all of them targeted journalists, you know. But in Serbia, you had the protesters who hated RTS, and they targeted them. You have other kind with other beliefs who were targeting professional media. And in Belgrade, for example, we saw that police was also not protecting. I'm not sure if I can say they were targeting, but some policemen attacked journalists, but for sure they didn't protect journalists. So those were the first protests I've ever been in any country ever, that journalists became targets. And it was a really big challenge. What happened, for example, a journalistic organization in Serbia, they sent those jackets when you have press, so they thought that they will protect people in that way, but our decision, and we are really, in our news office, we have really young journalists, and they were happy to wear that and to be there and to do that, and so happy to have a chance to report for such a big events. But I told them that we should not do that, because it's like putting a target signed on you because journalists were the targets. So we organized, we reported in the groups of 2 or 3 people. One was live, and the role of the other journalist was to protect his colleague. And that's how we did it. So I don't know, we're just learning from this, you know. You don't know what will happen tomorrow, and you have no idea how you will deal with that. So we had many texts coming to us because we are trying to do our job professionally, to debunk some things that are going on, and we have a government which is trying to hide so many things, and they don't want public to know anything. So it's a kind of normal to be in that position and being targeted all the times, and they use their imagination and keep thinking of new ways how to attack us. And not, you know, there are not, in our case, there are no like physical direct threats anymore, but those are some financial threats, or they will make a news portal with the same name like ours, Južne Vesti, and write propaganda or target me or my colleagues or what we are doing. They are saying that we are like political opponents, and what you as a journalist would never like to read about yourself. They just trying to destroy us publicly. But there's one thing very important, being a local journalist. In many situations, it's true that it's more difficult, because you see the people you write about, they're your neighbors. But in this situation, in what's going on in Serbia, it kind of protects us, because people, they like became people in niche, our readers, they became like our reporters, you know. We are building that relationship more. people started, because when you write something about us, they of course know that it's not true that I don't have a million of, I don't know what, euros or something. They know how you live, what you buy. They know everything about you. So it's good that we live in such a small cities, but everybody really knows you. And it's good to make a stronger relationship. You know about everything that happens in a city in a second. So sometimes they get surprised how we get there, how we even know that happened. But everyone, they became like and it's good because you're a small media, you cannot have, I don't know how many journalists, we're a really small news office, but you got more reporters, and those are your citizens. And what's interesting, that I think in 99% all the information we got from our I don't know, readers, they were all true information. We never got any false information from them. So they're such a reliable source.
Yes, this is also what journalists from smaller local media outlets from Bosnia and Herzegovina told me, that sometimes it's both difficult, harder and easier to work when you are a local media outlet. What about Maciek, the situation in Poland? So you mentioned during in our first part of the panel, so we started speaking about how difficult it was to report from the protests. Maybe can you tell us more about that? And also we can show the video that you plan to show.
That's just a short excerpt, so just one night of the process. Everything that we were about to see happened during one night, and I can actually comment in real time, so you know what's happening. And there are going to be scenes of violence, so if someone's sensitive.
Okay. So while we are waiting, maybe someone from the public has a question or a comment about the topic that we are discussing now. So how do you see, again, going back to my previous question, how do you see and did you see the role of journalists during the pandemic? So we are speaking here, how difficult? Okay, let's watch this and then we will go back.
So here's one of the peaceful protests of the women's strike in Poland. And a few people are just trying to get out.
Na czele jest tam Marta Lempart
few hours of
z megafonem.
Just wouldn't let them out.
Maciek, dawaj do przodu, dawaj do przodu. Dajemy.
Markings on, and the police is using tear gas indiscriminately towards the crowd. It's not used how it's supposed to be used, so like very directly onto the offender. So they're spraying everybody, including the reporters and including people who are in the back rows.
Zostałem spryskany gazem w tym momencie.
Like I was gassed at this very moment, but I took, okay, it's like my professional risk, but like in a second you're going to see the moments where I was targeted explicitly and my colleagues were targeted as well. Like here the police, actually counter-terrorist units who are not trained to work with the crowds, with protesters, are attacking the peaceful gathering, and they're wearing plain clothes. So people thought there was like far-righters, neo-Nazis, and at some point somebody says, no, these are actually the police. They're wearing plain clothes, they're improperly marked, so they're actually breaking the law. And you're gonna see that guy in the trench coat using his baton to, like, now he's taking it out, and in a second he's gonna like beat one of the protesters. And of course they didn't like documenting that, so in a second you will see how they're like aiming towards my face and my camera just to discourage me from documenting that. They're spraying from that's the police. They're actually got police markings. So like I try to do my job, like even though I got tear gas all over my face, I tried to approach them and film them. I don't think it will happen under this government, because like the prosecutor's office says it was all okay. Like we're actually suing the police, but I don't think they will face anything before the law and justice, like right-wing government is in power, because here they're just enforcing the party's will. Yeah, and here you can see member of parliament of the left like holding her parliamentary ID and being sprayed anyway. Like what she's holding is her card from the parliament. Like this unit was actually marked, so the counter-terrorists were unmarked, but like here I was like, that was after a few minutes. I just couldn't do my job properly anymore. I couldn't work, so that was just like the way of ensuring they remain they remain unpersecuted. He's like another, like this is like a civilian journalist not being able to work. He's the member of parliament we saw just a moment before. Luckily the paramedics were there, so it's like they were not like emergency services, they were just volunteers who were ensuring the peaceful protesters are safe. So I think that kind of speaks for everything, how like what we were facing, and I'm really curious if that's unsettling for you, like from people from the region over here, or is it like something that you were facing as well, like this kind of. Oh, the context of a protest. It was a wave of protests that sparked after the Constitutional Tribunal, which has been taken over by the government, has meddled with abortion laws, which were among the harshest in Europe, and they just made them even harsher. Yes, it's as I said before, those were like the biggest protests happening in Poland. At some point, the far-righters and the like neo-fascist movements, they attacked the women, like especially when the protests were happening in front of churches, and some protesters went into the churches, so that gave them an excuse to attack the women.
So as Gordon mentioned earlier, so journalists are the easiest targets in these kinds of situations. But we have a question here, so or a comment, and we need to wrap up this session.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, as a person who actually follows Maciek's lives, and given the situation that, and I am again curious how it is in other countries, but with the situation where the public TV or like all the established channels, even the more liberal ones, are just not transmitting it, and like they're not in it. The Okopes lives or your other independent media channels or like channels on Instagram that we're using are actually, I wasn't at that protest because it was like a month of them, and this was the most sort of dramatic one because it seemed like it would be similar to the other ones, but this is actually the main source of information. Like I don't follow, like I don't go to TV24, this is something like that would be for it, but this is like, for me, it's a main, like couple of profiles I follow is a main source of information, and people who are actually there live in it, getting sprayed in this case.
I can understand why the major TV station wouldn't be there, because that was happening, these protests were happening every day, they lasted for several hours, and sending like a major TV crew with 3 people, with a large camera, with maybe like a satellite car, that costs a lot of money. So what I'm basically using is this with some other attachment, but like anybody can use it, and I strongly encourage people to film with their camera, with their mobile phone cameras. This is the kind of of quality that you would get on a camera 20 years ago, like a professional TV equipment. So I use different attachments, like a professional microphone. I use some lighting, I use some stabilization, but like everyone can do that with minimal investment. And I think that the fact that a lot of citizens were filming the police made these protests much more safer. Of course, the police were trying to discourage people. They were telling them they're doing something illegal, but it's important to know one's rights. And thankfully, the European Tribunal of Justice ruled in 2019 that anybody who's filming or working for the sake of information is under the same protection as a so-called professional journalist.
No, so like the general point I was trying to make is the increased value and meaning the importance maybe even of like where do you get your information, especially in the situation where, at least in our country, it's like protests almost, not every month, but similar to that. So meaning situation that is high temperature, a lot of potential conflict and people who are actually there.
Somebody mentioned quality, so I think that right now the quality in journalism is your experience, your state of your workshop, maybe your support network, because having an editorial office behind me who will tell me, oh, here you screwed up, here don't worry, the police is not right. It's a great value of me for me.
Well, no, it's really you learned. It looks to me that you learned in a hard way never to stand in front of the police in protest. It was really, you never know what will happen. What really worries me, and I don't know, I hope that won't be a trend. What we hear is happened there and what's happening in Serbia and those protests. We have those people which are not really dressed as a police. Usually in protests, those people are there to calm people, to make sure that nothing bad happens. Of course, it's usual to have a policeman in civilian suit to be there to come, to predict what will happen and to stop it from happening. But what we have now are people like this. We are never sure, are they the police or they're para-police maybe, and who are they and why are they treating people that way, and what's that new trend, what's going on. We had such a situation in Serbia. I know the answer. Who are those people? And we don't know their names. We should know their names if they're official officers, if they're from public service. Those people should be punished, because it's for sure that that's not their job to fight with peaceful protesters.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. Unfortunately, the situation for journalists is not good. Protection of journalists and follow-ups of these and similar cases are not going well. Usually, such persons are never prosecuted. But we have to. Our time is up, and we have to end this. I really hope that on one way our aim was also to show how important journalism is in periods of especially in periods of crises, and how important it is to have professional journalists who do their job professionally. But I want to only ask one question, and maybe some of you can answer. How do you see the future of journalism? So we saw what was the situation with the pandemic and how the pandemic impacted journalism and journalists' everyday work. How do you see? Do you see that in the future people, and we saw that there was a certain kind of comeback of traditional media and professional media reporting. So do you see that in the future this will rise, or you see a negative trend? Maybe if anyone wants to answer.
What I could say is that traditionally, even from when I started my career, we have seen journalism, technically wise, it has been always evolving. I can just say that, for example, 2020 in Kosovo marked the first time that there were no mainstream papers being handed out. There was no papers anymore. Everything went online because it was not financially sane to keep printing more newspapers. So there was no printed newspapers. So that's a big shift for traditional media and the way they operate in like a short period of time. It was 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So I think that journalism, as it has been before, and it will continue to evolve depending on mostly the public and how people view journalism and how people want to get their information. And I think that media has to adapt to these changes and to these new requests or die eventually, because it's just one of those things that is inevitable. What I think is that there are some standards and there are some main points that will always stay the same standard-wise, quality-wise, and the truth must be sought out in whatever situation we're in. That's the most important thing. Technically, and the way and the format that the information is conveyed, then that can vary from time to time. It's my opinion. But yeah, the truth and unbiased truth, I would say, and also freedom of speech and getting to hear both sides of stories, it's one of the most important, standards of journalism, no matter in what ways it is done.
Okay, thank you so much. You want to add something quickly?
No, but it's okay. Well, I see the future. I think that we will all be doing more what he's doing at the moment, being there, being live all the time. There will be less technology. It will be more simple, and that's it.
So thank you. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your experiences, and thanks, as you mentioned, to the Point Conference that they dedicated a panel to journalism. So most often we hear, and also when you speak with people, or when you do focus groups on media consumption habits, you hear how all journalists are liars, how they spread fake news, etc. Actually, I think it's always important to stress good professional examples and to show that we really have good and professional journalists who are important for our societies and the future of our society. So thank you, and I think there is another a workshop right after this.